In today's lesson, we're going to be looking at dividing rational expressions. Yesterday, we looked at multiplying, and for dividing, it's going to work just like it, except there's one step we have to do first. If you remember fractions, if you had a fraction, for example, 3/4 divided by 7/8, we would do something that we referred to as Kentucky Fried Chicken, KFC. We would keep the first fraction, we would flip the second fraction, and we would change the sign. It's called multiplying by the reciprocal. So with fractions, you don't really divide, you multiply by the reciprocal. We're going to do the same thing with rational expressions. We're going to keep the first fraction, so we're going to keep 1 divided by x, and then we're going to multiply by the reciprocal, which means we're going to flip this fraction. So when we do that, it looks like this. We have 1 divided by x times, now the 2x, which was in the denominator, goes into the numerator, and the x minus 2 is now in the denominator. Now it's going to be just like yesterday's lesson. We were multiplying. Now it always helps to simplify as much as possible first. So we look up here, I see an x in the numerator and an x in the denominator, so those cancel out. And remember that this is a binomial, so I can't just cancel out an x from a binomial. It has to be an entire binomial that would cancel it out. So this looks like all that I can do. So what remains is 1 times 2 on the top, which is 2, and that binomial x minus 2 on the bottom. So once you flip it and you're multiplying by the reciprocal, it's going to be just like multiplying. So here we have one that's a little more involved. We're going to keep the first fraction, then we're going to flip the second one. So what was in the denominator now is in the numerator, and what was in the numerator is now in the denominator. So multiplying by the reciprocal. Now we're multiplying, so we're going to look and factor to help us to cross-cancel some things. On the first one up here, here's a binomial. I see that it has the greatest common factor of x, so I can factor out an x, and that would leave x minus 2. And then we have an x on the bottom. Here we have a trinomial, so we're going to have to factor that trinomial. Factor pairs for 1 that add together to get 2 would be +1 +1, so this is going to be a perfect square trinomial. So it's x plus 1 squared, but I'm going to write it twice, x plus 1, x plus 1. And on the bottom we have a binomial, 2 minus x. Now if we look for things to cancel out, here we have an x and an x, so they're gone. Here we have something that we refer to as opposite binomials. One is x minus 2, the other is 2 minus x. If we were to rewrite the second one, we could rewrite it with the commutative property as negative x plus 2. Still have the negative sign in front of the x, still have a positive sign inside of the 2. It would be the same as this one if we factor out a negative 1. So when you look for opposite binomials, they cancel each other out, but since you are factoring out a negative 1, it's going to make your final answer. We have to add a negative to your final answer. So this binomial cancels out this binomial, but we factored out a negative 1. And then what do we have left? Looks like the only thing we have left is on top, x plus 1 squared. So I'm going to erase this, all that chicken scratch I just did. Here's the same thing that I had written. Those cancel out, but you have to add the negative. The x's cancel out. So in our final answer, notice the negative that is there because of the opposite binomials. And then we have x plus 1 squared. That's all we have left. In our next example, we have this binomial, and there's nothing in the denominator, so it's understood to be over 1. So when we do the reciprocal, we're going to have 1 on the top, and then we move that binomial down to the denominator. Now we're going to multiply, so let's look for things that we can cancel out. Remember that this entire thing is a binomial, so it can only be canceled out with another identical binomial. But it does have a greatest common factor, a factor of 3a. So let's factor out a 3a, and that leaves a plus 2. So now outside the binomial, we have this 3a that we can use to cross-cancel. So here we have a 3 on the top and a 3 on the bottom. Since we pulled that out, it can cross-cancel. We have a b that cancels out with this b. One of the a's cancels out this a. Now again, we can't cancel out what's inside this binomial unless it's an identical binomial. So what does that leave us? Showing you the same thing, all the things that cancel out. It left us an a on the top, and it left us a, my chicken scratches on top of everything. Let's look at this second one down here. So what we had left was one of these a's on top, because one of them went away, and we have the a plus 2 left on the bottom. So it's a divided by a plus 2. So let's look at an example. If I can make this go away. I'm going to look at an example off of your paper today. I can pull it up on my smartboard actually. This is number 9 on your homework assignment. So again, you see that it's division. As soon as you see that it's division, you know that you have to fix this really fast. When it's division, you have to multiply by the reciprocal. So we're going to have 144x squared minus 1 on the top of this one. This one does not change. When you multiply, we're going to do by the reciprocal. I already noticed here that I'm going to have an opposite binomial that I'm going to have to factor out a negative 1 for. Okay, so let's look at this. First, when factoring and you see two terms, such as we have right here, you always check for the difference of two perfect squares. In here we do have the difference, and we have two perfect squares, so we can factor it by taking the square root of 144x squared, which is 12x, and the square root of 1, which is 1. I forgot the x. So we have 12x minus 1 and 12x plus 1. And on the bottom we have x minus 1. So I factored the difference of two perfect squares. On the other one, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this as the opposite binomial as a negative x minus 1. I flipped it and pulled out the negative 1. And on the bottom, I can factor out a 5x. That is going to leave 12x minus 1. Now if you look at what we can cancel out, we have the 12x minus 1 and the 12x minus 1. Here we have the x minus 1 and the x minus 1, but because I flipped this one, I pulled out that negative, so I know my final answer is going to be negative. And that looks like all that I can do. So what do we have left on top? We have 12x plus 1 left on top. And on the bottom, we have 5x. And the whole thing is negative because of the opposite binomial. So our final answer is negative 12x plus 1 divided by 5x. So I hope this helps you with dividing with rational expressions. Just remember the first step is always to multiply by the reciprocal.